In the first-class cabin, Janelle Rhodes sat quietly, her sharp gaze sweeping across the luxurious space as if she were far too familiar with the curious, skeptical glances often directed at a powerful black woman like herself. As the founding CEO of Rhodes Core Systems, a pioneering company in global artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, Janelle was no stranger to gourmet meals or meticulously personalized services. As usual, she had pre-ordered the lobster bisque and premium steak, her go-to meal on every international flight. Everything should have gone as smoothly as it always did. But then a flight attendant approached with a strained smile and announced that her meal had run out. Something stirred faintly within Janelle in that seemingly minor moment. She knew this wasn't a mishap. This was a choice. The indifferent glance, the emotionless voice, and the way she was handed a cold sandwich and a glass of water while other passengers dined on caviar and vintage champagne. None of it was random. Janelle was not just another passenger. She was not just a name on a flight manifest. She was the only black woman in first class, and she could feel it. This was no longer about food. This was about exclusion, about the silent judgment in people's eyes, about the unspoken message that she didn't belong here. But Janelle Rhodes was never the kind of woman to let something like that pass quietly. And what happened on Altura Air Flight 917 that day didn't just shake the airline. It forced the entire aviation industry to take a long, hard look at itself. This flight to Sterlingport was for Janelle to finalize a merger with one of Europe's leading data security conglomerates, a multi-billion-dollar deal, and a turning point that would bring Rhodes Core Systems into the global market, led by a black woman. The perfectly tailored navy blue suit embraced her tall, elegant frame. Her polished black leather shoes reflected the dazzling lights of the first-class lounge. Her curly hair was neatly pinned back at the nape of her neck, evoking a quiet, unmistakable power. Janelle Rhodes embodied a symphony of strength and composure. No one could ignore her presence, not even those born into the privileges of first class. When she gently placed her Hermes bag into the overhead compartment, a male flight attendant approached and nodded politely. But his eyes merely skimmed past her out of habit, then immediately fixed on the white man standing behind her. Janelle smiled, saying nothing. She was far too accustomed to the invisible treatment the world reserved for people like her, and she also knew those moments always marked the beginning of change. Seat 1A, the very first position, the best view, and the setting for a new chapter about to unfold. The first-class cabin seemed to envelop her in refined serenity, hand-stitched leather seats, glittering crystal glasses filled with fine wine, all designed for those who were used to being at the top. But for Janelle, that summit wasn't something bestowed. It was a triumph earned step by step, breath by breath. As with every Altura Air Flight, she had pre-ordered lobster bisque as a starter, followed by a medium-rare steak, paired with a vintage Chateau Margaux red wine. Not out of vanity, but as a personal ritual, a statement that she was here. A black woman among white suits, symbolic handshakes, and disapproving stares. She opened her tablet and lightly scrolled through the contract pages. On the screen was the merger agreement between Rhodes Core Systems and the Swiss partner, a strategy she had been crafting for over 2 years. Janelle didn't need to look at the menu. Everything had already been arranged. For someone at her level, every service was a commitment, not a suggestion. The faint sound of high heels echoed behind her. A firm, confident stride. A female voice rang out, gentle yet cold as honed steel. "Good afternoon. Ma'am, I'm Sloan, your flight attendant for today." Janelle looked up, her gaze meeting the pale, perfectly expressionless face of the attendant. Sloan Merritt, blonde hair tied back neatly, a smile that met the standard but lacked warmth. cold eyes sweeping over Janelle as if appraising a commodity from the delicate gold ring on her finger to every crease in her expensive suit. "I believe you received my meal request from last week," Janelle said, her voice soft but carrying enough weight to halt anyone who might underestimate her. Sloane blinked, then gave a slight smile, tilting her head as if trying to appear pleasant. "Yes, of course. We'll be serving as soon as the flight is stabilized." She turned away, but not without leaving behind the faintest curl of her lip, like a question mark. And Janelle knew that name, that face, that attitude. She had seen them far too many times before. Not in that exact person, but in the hundreds like her, those who wore politeness as a mask, but believed that power belonged to only one skin color. Janelle Rhodes kept her gaze steady, unwavering, while Sloane Merritt tilted her head slightly, the corner of her mouth curling into a polite smile that lacked any sincerity. "Yes, of course. We'll serve the meal as soon as the plane is stable," Sloane said, her voice smooth but hollow, then turned and walked away. Before leaving, she cast a faint, dismissive glance so subtle it could have gone unnoticed, had the recipient not been Janelle. Janelle frowned slightly. There was something familiar in that tone and gait, not because she had met Sloane before, but because she had encountered far too many people like her, those with feigned politeness, who firmly believed that power came in only one skin color. Another flight attendant passed by, male, tall, with brisk movements, bowing respectfully and greeting the white passengers behind her, calling each of them by name with formality. "Good afternoon, Mr. Grant Halverson, Mr. Derek Vaughn, Mr. Nolan Whitaker. It's a pleasure to serve you today." A soft chuckle rose from the seats behind. Glasses clinked. A deep male voice chimed in caviar before takeoff. "This flight is already off to a promising start." Janelle didn't turn around. She didn't need to look, but a chill crept down her spine, a silent reminder that the invisible line between being present and belonging had never disappeared. People had merely stopped mentioning it. She set down her tablet, her fingers tapping lightly on the armrest, each beat like a quiet warning that something was coming. And she knew, if Sloane Merritt believed that a meal could define who was worthy, then the woman sitting in seat 1 was going to show her the truth. The sound of high heels echoed again, as soft as a blade slicing through plush carpet. Sloane, with her all-too-familiar face made up just enough to pass as professional, but not enough to hide the cold. In her eyes stopped beside Janelle's seat, holding a meal tray, a tray with no lid. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Sloane said, her voice empty. "We've run out of premium meals. We only have cold chicken sandwiches and water remaining." Janelle narrowed her eyes, then slowly turned to fully face the flight attendant. "I placed my order last week," she said, her voice calm, but every word precise. "There's an email confirmation, a reservation code, and even a reminder message from Altura's system." Sloane gave a slight shrug, the note card in her hand fluttering like discarded paper. "Maybe the system didn't update." "That happens often," she said, then turned away without offering an apology, not even glancing back. In that moment, amidst the opulence of the first-class cabin, Janelle no longer heard the conversations around her. The soft golden glow reflecting off the wineglass seemed to vanish. Everything blurred, except for the tray of cold food, a slap in the face to her presence. She watched Sloane's back upright posture, confident strides, no hesitation. That wasn't the attitude of someone who'd made a mistake. It was calculated indifference, a belief that Janelle wouldn't speak up. Worse, the belief that she didn't deserve to be served like everyone else. Janelle's eyes scanned the cabin. The three men behind her still clinked their champagne glasses, chatting animatedly about the Asian market, cryptocurrency, investment strategies. Not one of them noticed anything unusual. Or perhaps they were simply used to women like her being overlooked. Victor Hensley, the male flight attendant from earlier, passed by again. He paused beside seats 1C and 1D, bowed his head. "It's a pleasure to serve you. Mr. Halverson, Mr. Vaughn, Mr. Whitaker. On today's flight," once again, caviar was served, hot towels distributed, wine glasses refilled. No one said a word to Janelle. No one asked if she needed anything. Not a word, not a glance. And she, the only black woman in the cabin, sat with a meal tray more fitting for economy class left behind, in a space where she should have been celebrated for her talent, perseverance, and intellect. But Janelle Rhodes was not someone easily pushed aside. She didn't get angry, didn't argue, but beneath her composed exterior, a quiet storm was beginning to form, a storm that Sloane, with her faux courtesy and condescending gaze, had no idea she'd just awakened. A storm powerful enough to uproot Altura Air's outdated service culture. The dull silver tray before her stood as a chilling symbol of rejection. A chicken sandwich wedged between two dry slices of bread, wilted lettuce, a cheap paper napkin, and a half-filled glass of water. No silver cutlery, no cloth tray liner, no trace that this was meant to be a first-class meal. Worse, it was unworthy of a CEO invited to speak at the European Economic Forum. Janelle sat upright, hands resting calmly on her knees. She didn't touch the food tray. Not out of pride, but because she needed to feel the full weight of the insult. She didn't avoid it. She wouldn't let it pass. She needed to remember every detail: Sloane's eyes, the scoffing laughter behind her, and the silence of every witness who chose to say nothing. 6 white men, 6 precisely tailored suits, 6 champagne glasses lifted in unison beneath the soft lighting of the first-class cabin. Not a single glance, not the smallest gesture, was directed toward Janelle Rhodes. No one asked why the only black woman in the cabin was sitting with a cold, lifeless meal tray, as if she had accidentally wandered into a world not meant for her. But she understood. She had lived with that feeling her entire life. A memory flashed nearly a decade ago, when Janelle first stepped into the boardroom at Alverton Equity. She was 33 then, invited to present the first AI security platform she had developed herself. She arrived early, meticulously prepared, polished in both plan and appearance. But as she entered the room, a white man at the head of the table didn't bother to look at her. He turned to the secretary and said, "Can I get a coffee?" Janelle didn't get angry. She smiled and replied, "I'll bring it right over, if you let me pitch you a $15 million security plan afterwards." The room fell silent. And from that moment on, no one ever mistook her for anyone else again. But not everyone learns that lesson. Sloane Merritt, a textbook product of a generation cushioned by status, had never had to fight for her position, had never been rejected simply because of her skin color. She didn't need to use overtly discriminatory words, nor deliver outright insults. The way she shrugged, the refusal to apologize, the steps that dismissed any wrongdoing that was the language of modern discrimination, cold, quiet, but sharp enough to cut deep. Janelle looked away from the lifeless meal tray, her gaze drifting around the cabin. Seat 1C Grant Halverson, CEO of a venture capital firm known for funding only Ivy League-founded startups. Years ago, he had passed on Rhodes Core Systems, citing a lack of senior executive experience. Seat 1D Derek Vaughn, a strategic analyst at a major insurance conglomerate, who once publicly questioned during a panel are women of color, truly capable of leading high-tech industries. Seat 2A, Nolan Whitaker, founder of a financial trading platform, once accused of harassing a black female employee. The case was never formally investigated. All three were being served Michelin star-level meals, and she was not. Janelle Rhodes closed her eyes. What she felt now was no longer anger. It was a deep exhaustion, the kind that comes to those who've reached the mountaintop, only to be dragged back down by the invisible rope of bias. But today, she didn't intend to climb anymore. She intended to bring the mountain down. No noise, no spectacle, but precise and irreversible. She unlocked her phone and opened the internal security management app of Rhodes Core Systems, a platform integrated with real-time data tracking tools. With a few taps, she accessed the employee records linked to the airline's reservation system. Name Rebecca Ann Merritt. Title lead, flight attendant, business class. Altura Air Internal Employee ID ATA 9035. A stream of data appeared. 2 passenger complaints for discriminatory service behavior. 1 internal email that read, "Prioritize guests who tip better." No direct evidence of racial bias. But the wording revealed a pattern of customer profiling driven by personal prejudice. Janelle saved everything. Then she composed a secure message to Talia Monroe, her senior executive assistant. Activate emergency audit protocol. Flight 917. Employee ID ATA 9035. Confirm within 10 minutes. Not a word of the message betrayed emotion. But beneath it lay a deadly precision. This wasn't just about Sloan. It was about the entire system that had enabled people like her to thrive. She turned off the screen, looked away from the food tray, her eyes fixed forward toward the faint light from the cockpit door, a sliver of brightness like a runway stretching ahead. This was no longer a story about a meal or a lapse in professionalism. This was a declaration. The soft light wrapped around the first-class cabin. Janelle Rhodes closed her eyes, but her mind did not. It was spinning like gears newly engaged. Old images, cutting remarks, indifferent glances all surged back like an underwater current. She saw herself at 26, at her first product launch at Westcourt Valley. A small conference room, 7 white men, buttoned shirts, MacBooks in hand. She stood among them with a prototype of a revolutionary AI security system. But the first question they asked was, "So, do you handle the technical side, or are you just the co-founder in charge of marketing?" She remembered that feeling well, the feeling of walking into a casino where all the cards had been dealt in advance and the seat she was offered was simply the one that was left, when no one else had bothered to care. Janelle Rhodes did not back down. She did not retreat. 3 years after being dismissed during that tech presentation, the security model she had built was contracted for deployment by the United States Department of Defense. It wasn't a lucky break. It was the result of every moment she had been doubted, ignored, and every silent step forward she had taken. She remembered being 34, attending a tech conference in Wexbury, where she was the keynote speaker. A journalist stood up and asked, half encouraging, half skeptical, as the first black woman to make the top 10 under 40 CEOs list, "Do you believe your success came from luck or from gender equity policies?" Janelle looked him straight in the eye. Her smile was as subtle and sharp as a blade drawn from its sheath. "I believe success comes when you work 3 times harder than others, get doubted 10 times more, and keep moving forward as if nothing could ever stop you." The cabin lights gradually shifted from warm yellow to a soft blue hue. The pilot announced the plane was flying over Canadian airspace, with approximately 8 hours left until Sterlingport. A gentle chime rang the signal, that the main meal service was beginning. Victor Hensley, the male flight attendant from earlier, reappeared, moving gracefully between the rows. Janelle Rhodes opened her eyes. Still seated calmly, she looked out the window. Beyond it stretched the infinite night sky. But inside her, a different kind of battle was taking form, a battle without gunfire, yet strong enough to shake an entire system. At the center of that battle was Sloane Merritt. She wasn't a blatant villain. She didn't act radically or use overtly racist language, and that was precisely the problem. Sloane embodied a type of bias that had been socialized into professional conduct, wrapped in polite smiles and insincere apologies. And worst of all, the system had allowed it to continue, had let someone like her rise to the position of lead flight attendant, unchecked and unchallenged, because people like Janelle, too busy surviving, hadn't spoken up. Janelle knew the kind of discrimination that never shouted in office hallways. It quietly removed you from the priority list. It called you ma'am, but never by name, like it did with others. It forgot the meal you pre-ordered, but never forgot the one for the white man beside you. And that was exactly why today, she would no longer be silent. She gently tapped her smartwatch. A secure signal was sent to Talia Monroe, her senior executive assistant. Verify flight attendant record ATA 9035. Review behavior under International Airline Service Association protocol. 3 minutes later, the screen displayed a reply. Full profile accessed. 2 customer complaints within 12 months. 1 departmental transfer due to unprofessional behavior. No formal disciplinary action. Janelle nodded slightly. Once again, the system had chosen silence, but this time she would make the system speak. As Victor Hensley approached her row, Janelle gave a slight gesture. "I have a question, Mr. Hensley," she said, her voice even and soft, yet every word cut through the airline's silk-lined image like a needle through satin. Victor paused. "Yes, Ms. Rhodes, I'd like to know, per Altura's internal policy, when a premium meal is pre-ordered, what determines priority if availability is limited?" Victor hesitated. "Generally, it depends on time of booking and flight frequency. I'm a Diamond Plus member. I placed my order 7 days in advance and received system confirmation," Janelle said, her gaze never leaving his. "I understand." Victor looked away, fingers fidgeting with a napkin on the tray. It may have been a system error or a temporary crew prioritization. Janelle said nothing more. She just smiled faintly and turned back toward the window. She had heard enough, and in the hushed stillness of first class, where everyone thought this was just another flight, Janelle Rhodes was rewriting history. Not with speeches, not with cameras, but with evidence, action, and a will that nothing could shake. No outrage, no confrontation, no theatrics. Her presence alone was the declaration. She opened her phone, fingers gliding as if texting a friend. But what she sent was a directive, one powerful enough to trigger an internal audit that could bring down the entire system. Activate internal audit protocol. Flight 9.1. Request full crew records. Confirm. Just 6 lines. 6 lines that could end a career. 6 lines that would force Altura's board of directors to sit down not to discuss marketing or service strategies, but to face the truth they had been avoiding for far too long. Across the ocean, in the darkened offices of Rhodes Core Systems, Talia Monroe received the signal, and with the precision of reflex, she didn't ask, "What happened?" or "Are you okay?" She began the trace. When Talia Monroe received the encrypted message from the security system, she didn't ask, "What happened?" or "Are you okay?" She simply responded in the exact style Rhodes Core Systems received. Initiating data retrieval. Across the ocean, Janelle Rhodes calmly slipped her phone into her coat pocket. Not a word, not a single expression. But at that moment, a chain of global servers had awakened. Passenger information, service logs, Altura Air employee records all were being accessed, filtered, and verified under the highest aviation security standards. In the first-class cabin, no one knew what was unfolding. Laughter still echoed from behind. Grant Halverson and Derek Vaughan debated the future of European digital currency, while Nolan Whitaker poured his third glass of champagne. Sloan Merritt continued to move down the aisles at a relaxed pace. Her professional yet insincere smile etched onto her face. She asked cheerfully, "Mr. Vaughan, would you care to try the chocolate mousse?" Then bent slightly lower than necessary as she poured wine for Halverson, and gently touched Whitaker's hand as she raised her glass in a toast. Every gesture, every glance, every smile was selective, and clearly, none were for Janelle. 12 minutes after the initial message, Janelle's watch gave a subtle buzz. An encrypted notification appeared with a PDF file and 2 internal links. She opened the file, her eyes scanning the first line. Crew behavior record, Rebecca Ann Merritt, ID AT9035. Below was a list of cold, clinical notes. May 2023. VIP passenger filed 3 consecutive complaints of incorrect meal service. Signs of preferential treatment toward passengers of similar background. August 2023. Internal report of unprofessional remarks in the crew lounge. November 2023. Crew operations requested temporary suspension due to negative impact on service reputation. All concluded with one brief line. No formal disciplinary action taken. Janelle's right hand clenched slightly, but her face remained completely composed. Not a flicker of anger, just a cold confirmation that she was right and they were wrong. Worse yet, they had let it continue. Sloan Merritt wasn't merely an individual with lapses in judgment. She was the product of a culture that had long excused discrimination with terms like overloaded, system error, or insufficient grounds for action. That very culture had created people like Sloan, and today it would face the consequences. Janelle scrolled to the other attachment. A full crew roster for Flight 9P7 appeared. She flagged 3 names with high complaint frequency. Sloan topped the list. She then pulled a quote from Altura's internal policy. Any biased or discriminatory behavior, even without direct verbal evidence, if corroborated through repeated actions, will be subject to disciplinary measures per the industry's ethical standards. Janelle Rhodes smiled not because of triumph, but because her silence today was no longer a weakness. It was power. She pressed send. The compiled report and formal investigation request were transmitted directly to the CEO of Altura Air, with copies sent to 3 attorneys she had worked with on previous discrimination cases. Request for internal investigation of Flight 917 crew. Urgent. No press conference. No social media. No public outrage. Just one line. She folded her phone, closed her eyes, and rested her head on the plush leather seat. The sky outside remained peaceful, but beneath those clouds a storm was forming, and its eye was Janelle Rhodes. On the 42nd floor of Rhodes Core Systems headquarters in Brightford, in an office lit only by the glow of LED screens reflected off thick-rimmed glasses, Talia Monroe. 29 was working at a speed that would earn the respect of any cybersecurity expert. Her curly hair was neatly pinned back the style she chose when absolute focus was needed. Her fingers moved rapidly, each keystroke like the heartbeat of a data trace reaching its climax. Janelle didn't need to explain, didn't need to elaborate. A few precise keywords were all Talia needed to understand the gravity. because between them, trust was not built on the number of words, but on the precision of each action. Talia opened the internal analytics console. She accessed the secure API linked to aviation sector data and global partner records. The code began to run, and in under 90 seconds, the first wave of data appeared. The stream of code flickered across the screen, and within 90 seconds, the first line appeared. Rebecca Ann Merritt, lead business class flight attendant, Altura Air. Employee ID AT9035, employed since 2018. Confirmed onboard flight 917. The initial data seemed routine, but Talia Monroe didn't stop there. She dug deeper into the customer feedback system, analyzing complaint history associated with Sloan Merritt over the past 3 years. That's when the irregular pieces began to surface. February 2022. A black first-class passenger was denied the wine they had pre-ordered with no clear explanation. September 2022. 2 Asian passengers reported being served only after all other guests, despite boarding earlier. March 2023. An Indian businesswoman was ignored after pressing the attendant call button 3 times on Flight 803. None of these incidents resulted in disciplinary action. The system recorded a familiar rationale: insufficient evidence to pursue violation. Talia narrowed her eyes. She knew all too well how cases like this were often quietly buried. People like Sloan Merritt knew how to skirt the boundaries of policy. No shouting, no overt insults. She simply ignored those she deemed unworthy. And the system had allowed her to do so for nearly 6 years. Talia accessed the behavioral mapping tool, a proprietary analytics platform she and Janelle Rhodes had developed at Rhodes Core Systems. The system used algorithms to evaluate bias through vocal tone, facial expression, response time, and interaction levels across passenger demographics. The result made Talia smirk, not a smile, but the kind of professional disdain born from data. Behavioral bias index 87.4%. Repeat discriminatory behavior toward non-white passengers, 15 of 36 flights. Alert high organizational culture, risk recommendation. Deep-level investigation. Talia marked all data points. She generated a PDF report with authentication codes linked to the internal evidence library. She then submitted the report to the Command Review Inbox, a channel reserved strictly for incidents impacting strategic partners or brand reputation. Beneath the report, she included a note: systemic discriminatory behavior. Flight 917 crew per directive from Janelle Rhodes. Recommend activation of cultural audit. Simultaneously, Talia sent copies to 3 senior executives at Altura Air, including CEO Garrett Langford, a former Rhodes Core Systems partner on several tech initiatives. She knew Langford would not ignore anything involving Janelle, not just out of respect, but because he understood. When Janelle Rhodes took action, it was never out of revenge. It was because the system needed to change. Less than 5 minutes later, Talia's screen lit up with a confirmation. Investigation order issued. Legal and HR teams will be present upon arrival for immediate review. Thank you for bringing this matter to light. Talia leaned back, hands laced behind her head. She didn't exhale in relief, because she knew this was only the beginning. In her years working alongside Janelle, she had watched her CEO take down powerful banks, ruthless investment firms, even the slickest political players. But never had Janelle triggered the Audit Now protocol unless she had a reason of absolute gravity. The clock struck 2:00 a.m. in Brightford. Aboard Flight 917 in Seat 1A, Janelle Rhodes was still awake. And in Seat 2C, Sloan Merritt was still smiling faintly, unaware that from this moment on, the ground beneath her was already crumbling. Janelle nodded slightly. Her gaze sharpened like steel. Her voice remained composed, like a leader too familiar with systems rotting from within. No need for chaos at 30,000 feet. She knew everything that needed to happen was already in motion. Now. Every word she spoke served only one purpose: to confirm there was no way out. She pressed the call button. A soft ding sounded subtle enough to go unnoticed, but clear enough to summon a middle-aged attendant with salt and pepper hair. The name tag read, Victor Hensley. His steps slowed as he approached seat 1A as if instinct warned him. This woman was not like the usual passengers. "I'd like to follow up on the pre-ordered meal," Janelle said. Her voice low but firm. Each word was like a thin blade, slicing through Altura Air's glossy surface. Victor stood straight, resting one hand lightly on his tray. "Yes, ma'am." Janelle cut in, not loudly, but razor sharp. "I heard Ms. Merritt mentioned passenger priority." What exactly did she mean by that? Victor froze. His eyes flicked about, as though searching for an exit from what seemed like an innocent question. But he knew this was no longer about a meal. Victor Hensley faltered. Janelle Rhodes' question was never about the meal. It was a linguistic trap, a sharp spear thrust straight into a future investigation report. "I think it might have just been a miscommunication in the service process," he stammered. "We don't have a discriminatory policy. We just prioritize based on meal request timing and availability." Janelle tilted her head slightly, her gaze sharp as a razor blade. "I'm a Diamond Plus member. I placed my order 7 days ago, with email confirmation and reservation code. In this cabin, I'm the only one not served the premium meal. Yet Ms. Merritt spoke of passenger priority. If that's not discrimination, what is?" Victor remained silent. A bead of sweat formed at his temple. Despite the cabin's cool temperature, he wasn't foolish enough to deny it outright, but he lacked the courage to face it head-on. Janelle offered a smile like an apple slice carved with a freshly honed blade light, precise and cold. "No need to answer," she said quietly. "I understand." Victor bowed slightly, stepped back, then walked away faster than usual, like a fox slipping off stage from an interrogation spotlight. But what he didn't know, Janelle didn't need that answer as evidence. She already had everything. She reopened her smartwatch. The screen displayed an update from Talia Monroe investigation request approved by CEO Garrett Langford. HR and legal will be present upon landing in Havenport. Order code Redline 917. Redline 917, an internal code reserved for high-level events posing serious threats to brand reputation. Per protocol, the entire flight crew would be monitored upon deboarding. Cabin video recordings would be archived and reviewed. An emergency meeting would be held upon landing, with HR, legal, and regional leadership present. Involved individuals would be suspended within 24 hours. And Janelle knew since she sent the first report, each domino had begun to fall. At the back of the cabin, Sloan Merritt was still cheerfully chatting with Grant Halverson, every step between the aisles unconsciously adding more behavioral proof of bias. She had no idea that every interaction, vocal tone, even the angle of her head when serving was being tracked and analyzed by Rhodes Core Systems AI, via live data from its partner system designed to protect VIP clients. Janelle exhaled not with relief, but with affirmation. This was why she didn't confront Sloan when she was humiliated. She didn't need a scene. She needed a collapse. She opened her tablet and accessed her member profile in Altura Air's partner system. Everything aligned. 10 consecutive years as a Diamond Plus member. An average of 12 first-class flights per year. One of 50 VIP passengers invited to give service feedback last year. She flagged all items. A flawless profile, logically airtight, emotionless, no weak points. Janelle didn't act out of ego. She understood that if she stayed silent, people like Sloan Merritt would continue to exist, and people like her black women, founders, executives would remain invisible. That could no longer be allowed. Not when she was sitting in seat 1A, a seat she had earned through blood, sweat, youth, and intellect. The plane shook slightly. The captain announced descent. Sloan walked past again. Her eyes glanced over Janelle as if she didn't exist. That gaze that looking through, not at Janelle, had known it her entire career. But this time silence would be forced to speak. As the landing gear struck the runway, the screech echoed like an overture. From this moment, nothing would remain the same. Janelle Rhodes opened her eyes, her head tilting slightly as if savoring the air. But in truth, she was listening for signals only someone who had survived billion-dollar deals would recognize: the shriek of wheels. The passengers exhaled relief. The hurried steps of the flight crew. She didn't rush to unbuckle her seatbelt. Her smartwatch buzzed twice, each buzz a chain link now fully engaged. Tally had completed the behavioral analysis report, including cabin video showing Sloan favoring white passengers. Comparison of service times between passengers. Passengers submitted footage of Sloan denying Janelle's meal. The final message had been sent just 3 minutes before landing. Forward case to Service Ethics Commission. Priority level emergency. Code Geneva 1A. The plane came to a complete stop. Janelle unbuckled her belt. Not in haste. Without expression, she stood, adjusted her blazer hem, and slung her leather bag over her shoulder. Everything had been set in motion. Janelle Rhodes stepped out of the first-class cabin, each stride steady, unrushed. Behind her, passengers were still rummaging through their luggage, chatting, waiting. At the aircraft door, 2 individuals in dark suits stood ready. One was Carter Linwood, Altura Air's regional CEO for Europe. The other, a petite woman with razor-sharp eyes, wore a name tag that read Legal Department Havensport Office. Both bowed simultaneously as Janelle stepped out. "Welcome, Ms. Rhodes." "We sincerely apologize for Janelle didn't stop." She glanced at them, then spoke just loud enough for everyone around to hear. "No apology necessary. This is just the beginning. No further words. No handshake. No turning back." Behind her, Carter and the legal representative straightened, their expressions shifting. They had read the report. They knew exactly what awaited behind the welcoming doors of the business-class lounge. They understood. This wasn't just a service failure. This was a system failure. And now, they were about to pay for it. At the rear exit, the crew began deplaning as usual. Sloan Merritt strode out with the group, still wearing her calm, composed expression. In her mind, the evening would still be a typical martini night at her favorite hotel. She'd tell her friends about the difficult passenger on Flight 917 as if it had been nothing. She had no idea waiting at the end of the jetway were 3 men in black suits from HR and the crisis coordination team. As Sloan approached, one of them raised a tablet displaying a clear message. "Flight 917 crew, please proceed to Emergency Conference Room 3. Sloan's face froze. Her eyes scanned around, searching for a sign this was some mistake. But the look from Victor Hensley, the colleague right behind her, was silent, resolute. No one was smiling anymore. The earthquake had begun, and she was the epicenter. Janelle Rhodes walked through Havenport Airport's arrival hall, where the VIP team was already in place to escort her to the hotel for the summit delegation. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Talia Monroe testimonies have begun. Merritt has been suspended from duty. The case will be presented to the board tomorrow morning. Janelle didn't reply immediately. She stepped into the waiting black limousine. As the door closed, the outside light was sealed off completely. She rested her head against the soft leather seat. Her eyes stared forward. She knew what happened today wasn't just about her. It marked a turning point, an unspoken declaration, louder than any speech, not a reaction, a reckoning. As the limousine disappeared beyond the airport gates, a flurry of red-flagged emails appeared across the computer screens of Altura Air's executive leadership at their Havensport headquarters. Subject urgent incident flight 917. Immediate board meeting requested. Within 30 minutes, an emergency meeting was convened. Attendees, regional directors, legal counsel, head of customer service, and the chief of flight operations. Attached to the meeting notice was a concise addendum. Complainant Janelle Rhodes, CEO, Rhodes Core Systems. The moment that name appeared, the room thickened with tension. Janelle Rhodes, not just a CEO, not just a VIP passenger, but one of the pioneers reshaping 21st century corporate culture. A figure once named by Time as a global architect of digital equity. And now she was at the center of a scandal that Altura Air's own system had allowed to happen. Right there, in seat 1A, Garrett Langford, Altura's current CEO, known for his reformist mindset and commitment to transparency, sat silently at the head of the table. In front of him, a 23-page report, boldly titled Behavioral Discrimination Report, Flight 917, Severity Emergency per Global Service Ethics Code. All eyes turned to the screen, where Talia Monroe, representing Rhodes Core Systems, had joined via secure connection from Brightford. "We won't take much of your time," Talia began. Her voice was cold and precise, without anger. Her eyes looked directly into the camera. "We don't need an apology. Rhodes Core doesn't need empty promises. We need action. We need assurance that your system does not enable subtle discrimination. No more excuses. No more avoidance." She paused, scanning the tense expressions of everyone in the room. Then she pressed a button. A video appeared on screen, footage from a passenger's camera. It showed Sloan Merritt handing a meal tray to Janelle, speaking in a flat voice. "Maybe the system didn't update. This happens all the time." On the large screen, the video was clear. Sloan Merritt stood before seat 1A, holding a meal tray, her expression blank. Maybe the system didn't update. That happens all the time. Next came the service time comparison chart between first-class passengers. White passengers average time 42 seconds. Janelle Rhodes 6 minutes and 11 seconds. Meal denied. No explanation. A veteran service consultant frowned and turned to Garrett Langford. "This can't be covered up." Garrett nodded, his voice firm. "We won't cover it up, not because of Janelle's name, but because this is no longer a personal issue. It's a systemic flaw." No one objected. Altura Air, long proud of its elite service standards, had now been exposed. An elite system built not on merit, but on skin color, gender, and outdated social norms. And the woman who sat in seat 1A was the one who drew the line around that failure. When the call ended, Talia Monroe signed off from the screen. Garrett Langford stood up and tapped the table lightly, effective immediately. The entire Flight 917 crew is suspended. A comprehensive investigation will be launched for every flight that included Sloan Merritt in the last 24 months. He paused, scanning the room. "We will issue a public apology to Ms. Rhodes, and more than that, I want to invite her to serve as cultural advisor for our entire crew training program." A regional director raised an eyebrow. "You're planning to let her rewrite our policies." Garrett didn't hesitate. "Not planning. We need her to." It was an unprecedented decision. But at that moment, no one was thinking about old protocols anymore, because everyone knew if they didn't act, Altura Air would forever be associated with this scandal, a stain on a brand built from polished luxury. At a lakeside hotel in Havenport, Janelle Rhodes sat in a quiet room. In front of her, a steaming cup of herbal tea. On the screen, a newly opened email. "We sincerely apologize for the incident. A full-scale investigation has been initiated. We are honored to invite you to join the advisory board for our service culture reform. This is not just an honor, but a responsibility we believe only you can shoulder." Garrett Langford, CEO, Altura Air. Janelle didn't smile. She simply tapped 3 fingers softly on the table. Her eyes gazed toward the still lake outside. Enough to understand the earthquake that began with a cold sandwich tray had now forced the entire luxury service industry to look inward. Meanwhile, the Flight 917 crew exited the terminal, with their usual demeanor relieved after a long journey. Sloan Merritt led the way, her high heels striking the marble floor in steady rhythm. Her blonde hair was neatly tied back, and her smile worn like a mask. Too long no longer hinted at what was real. To her, it had been nothing special. Just another difficult passenger. Another woman of color overreacting for not receiving lobster bisque or the steak she'd ordered. All that fuss over a sandwich. Exhausting, she thought. But as they walked through the doors to the crew-only corridor, no one was laughing anymore. Waiting in the hallway were 3 men in black suits from the Internal Security Division and 2 senior HR officers with red-tag nameplates, the insignia of the Emergency Investigation Team. A lawyer stood beside them, holding an iPad and a thick folder clearly stamped "Confidential Internal Ethics Evaluation." No one in the crew said a word. The solemn air, the white lights reflecting off the granite floor. It felt more like a tribunal than an airport hallway. A woman stepped forward, her eyes as sharp as a razor. Her name, Karen Dufresne, Global Director of Service Culture at Altura Air. "Flight 917 crew, please proceed to Emergency Interview Room 2. This is a mandatory meeting, per Clause 6.3 of the Global Service Ethics Code." A male flight attendant behind Sloan looked at her, eyes full of confusion. Sloan opened her mouth to ask, "What's going on?" But Karen's gaze stopped her cold. The list was ready. The files were locked. They were no longer crew members who had just completed a flight. They were subjects under investigation for serious violations of professional ethics. Each isolation room was equipped with a surveillance camera, a senior HR official, and a lawyer observing. Sloan Merritt sat upright, trying to maintain her composure. But inside, panic had already begun to swell. The woman across from her opened a file, her eyes never leaving the text. "Ms. Merritt, we'll be asking you a few questions regarding service data from Flight 917, as well as other flights within the past 24 months. This interview is being recorded and may be used as evidence in internal disciplinary proceedings, including termination if violations are confirmed." Sloan swallowed hard. Her lips were parched. The investigator activated her tablet. A video began to play the exact moment Sloan had told Janelle Rhodes. Maybe the system didn't update. That happens all the time. In the clip, Janelle's expression wasn't angry. It was unnervingly calm. "Do you recall this situation? Can you explain why 5 other passengers received their pre-ordered meals, but the passenger in seat 1A did not? I think maybe there was a system glitch. We've checked. The system confirms the meal order was submitted 7 days prior and reconfirmed at check-in. "Do you have anything to add?" Sloane could no longer respond. Her eyes now betrayed growing panic. For the first time in her life, she was facing real consequences. Every instance of refusal to serve, every shrug, every indifferent remark, it had all been recorded, not on paper, but through behavior, through glances, through cameras, and through the tired but silent looks of those who had long remained quiet. But this time, the woman in seat 1A wasn't silent anymore. At Altura Air's headquarters in Havenport, Garrett Langford sat alone in meeting room 1. On the table were 3 preliminary reports from the investigation team Sloane Merritt recommended for indefinite suspension systemic bias, recommendation for a complete overhaul of training programs, appointment of Janelle Rhodes as independent advisor on diversity and service culture. He didn't need to read them again. Garrett knew an era at Altura Air had ended, not because the media found out, not because customers protested, but because one woman stepped off the plane from seat 1A with the composure of justice. A woman who knew justice didn't need to shout to be heard. That same afternoon, an internal announcement was sent to all Altura Air employees across global branches. The subject line was marked urgent, high priority immediate suspension of employee Sloane Merritt, implementation of comprehensive training system reform. The memo was signed personally by CEO Garrett Langford. It included a rare public statement from a luxury airline. "We acknowledge that certain subtle discriminatory behaviors have been overlooked within our internal systems. This is the moment Altura Air must take responsibility and, more importantly, must change." At the Havenport HR office, Sloane Merritt sat hunched, still clutching her personal file. Her face was pale, not because of the suspension, but because she realized that everything she had once considered normal was now evidence. Emails once considered hallway chatter had now been flagged and dissected by the language monitoring system. These black passengers always act like their CEOs. Black customers are usually demanding. I just handle it quickly to avoid trouble. Met a Michelle Obama clone today. Sandwich and water should be enough. Once, these lines drifted through inboxes like trivial gossip. Now, legally and culturally, they were irrefutable proof, a system of covert discrimination, not in words, but in dismissive glances and indifferent shrugs. And it wasn't just Sloane. 2 other members of the flight crew, including Victor Hensley, who had dodged Janelle's question, were now under behavioral scrutiny. All of their past flights, the quiet complaints from black passengers, the forgotten services, the ignored call buttons, were now being reviewed, one entry at a time. From a victim of discrimination to a leader in global service culture reform. A 3-page feature in the Washington Post social equality section shared a single video clip the moment Janelle Rhodes said just one sentence, in first class. "I understand." It wasn't an accusation, nor was it an angry reaction. It was the declaration of someone who had seen it all and decided it would not continue. The social campaign for seat 1A spread rapidly. Thousands shared their stories of being sidelined, ignored, rendered invisible because of their skin color, gender, or background, and each story ended with a single line. "I wasn't in seat 1A, but I deserve respect." Altura Air's New York office received over 9,000 emails demanding corporate culture reform. The International Relations Department in London received formal letters from 3 major investors requesting internal workshops on diversity and inclusion, and Garrett Langford, the company's CEO, got a direct call from the U.S. Department of Transportation, requesting an official report on internal culture in the luxury airline sector. But Janelle didn't need to appear in the media. She didn't need to seize the microphone. Her actions had become a voice in themselves, At a lakeside hotel in Havenport, Janelle sat with three young women, women of color, who had worked in the service industry, who had been forgotten, who once believed they had no right to speak up. "We want to learn how to speak out like you," one of them said. Janelle shook her head, her gaze firm. "I didn't speak out with words. I made the system speak for itself, and I made sure it could no longer look away." Outside the window, the lake was still as glass, but beneath the surface, quiet waves were shifting like the changes that began from Seat 1A. On the flight Sloan Merritt would never forget. Janelle Rhodes never needed to raise her voice, never lost control, never begged to be heard, because she understood true power doesn't lie in volume. It lies in action taken at the right moment. And that moment was a cold sandwich tray, a blank stare, and a denied meal. Not from shortage, but because the person in Seat 1A didn't fit someone's definitions of deserving. She didn't yell. She didn't protest. She didn't stand up in first class like many are coached to do in civil disobedience workshops. She simply nodded and said, "I understand." And that calmness stripped away the facade of a system, one where luxury wasn't designed to serve, but to silently exclude those who were never meant to belong. Comments like "black passengers always act like their CEOs" were once considered internal banter. Now, they were exposed. Service data once ignored was now displayed on charts. Emails buried in archives had become evidence, all revealed by someone who never had to raise her voice. 3 days after the incident, Altura Air held a press conference in Havenport, attended by dozens of major media outlets. For the first time in the airline's history, they invited a non-executive to speak on stage. That person was Janelle Rhodes. She walked to the podium in an ivory suit, no glitter, no corporate logos, only a small black swallow pin on her lapel, the symbol of the Seat 1A Coalition, the organization she co-founded with other black female leaders to advocate for fairness in the luxury service industry. No pre-written speech, no media team behind her, just a woman standing at a microphone, her voice steady and sharp like an arrow through polished armor. "I'm not here to be angry. I'm not here to play the familiar victim. I'm here because there are still people sitting in seat 34F, or by the restroom people considered unworthy of attention, just because of their skin color, their voice, or because they can't pronounce the name of the wine on the menu." She looked directly at Altura Air's representatives, but she didn't accuse. She let the truth speak for itself. "I didn't demand a meal. I demanded a system that doesn't exclude me simply because I don't look like the passengers who usually sit in Seat 1A. She spoke of Sloan Merritt, but never mentioned her name. She spoke of attendants who remembered the names of 3 white passengers, but only called her ma'am. She spoke of being seen, but never truly acknowledged. And then she paused. The overhead lighting shifted from sterile white to warm amber. For a moment, the entire room fell silent. No further words were needed. Following the press conference, a series of progressive reforms were launched at Altura Air. All flight attendants worldwide were required to participate in mandatory training on unconscious bias and equity in luxury service. A direct feedback channel for VIP passengers was introduced, along with a rapid response unit dedicated to monitoring and addressing issues related to organizational culture. Janelle Rhodes was officially invited to serve as strategic advisor for the Redefining Luxury program, a global initiative to redefine fairness in premium service. Meanwhile, Sloan Merritt, once a quiet symbol of polished professionalism, now stood as living proof of a system that had run smoothly on the silence of the marginalized. The front page of Bloomberg headlined, "When Janelle Rhodes Didn't Have to Shout. A CEO Changed the Airline Industry with Just a Look." Beneath it, a quiet but powerful subheading. Just one sentence. I understand. That evening, Janelle declined all interview requests. She turned down CNN and BBC alike, not out of pride, but because she knew everything that needed saying. The system had already said on its own. On the balcony of her hotel overlooking Lake Lehman, she stood silently, eyes fixed on the reflection of lights on the water's mirror-still surface. A young assistant stepped out, ready to deliver the positive shareholder reports for Altura Air, but Janelle raised her hand gently to stop him. I don't need feedback, she said calmly. I just need that system to never again dare to fall asleep. And to her, that was the real victory. At the same time, an internal memo was sent to over 22,000 employees across Altura Air's global operations. The subject line marked urgent, immediate suspension of employee Sloan Merritt. Launch of comprehensive service training reform. The document was signed personally by CEO Garrett Langford and accompanied by a rare public statement from a luxury airline. We acknowledge that subtle discriminatory behaviors have been overlooked in our internal systems. Now is the time for Altura to take responsibility and, more importantly, to change. At the HR office in Havenport, Sloan Merritt sat with her head bowed, still clutching her personal file. Her face was pale, not because of the suspension, but because she now realized everything she once believed to be normal had become evidence. And worse, everything had been recorded. Emails once dismissed as hallway humor were now being dissected by the language monitoring system. Word by word, black passengers always act like their CEOs. People of color usually want attention. I just get it over with. Another cheap Michelle Obama look-alike today. Sandwich and water will do. These lines, once drifting through inboxes like whispers, had now become, legally and culturally, undeniable evidence of a hidden form of discrimination where bias wasn't screamed, but shown in shrugs and dismissive glances. And Sloan wasn't the only one. 2 other crew members, including Victor Hensley, the one who had dodged Janelle's question, were also placed under behavioral review. Their previous flights, the quiet complaints from black passengers, the accidental missed services and ignored call buttons were now under full audit. Beyond the airline, the impact rippled wide. Within 24 hours, major newspapers had responded. The New York Times black CEO discriminated against in-flight power is no longer silent. The Guardian, a denied meal and a luxury service system unveiled. Forbes' Janelle Rhodes from victim to leader of global service culture reform. In the Washington Post social equality column, the now iconic video of Janelle saying just one sentence was shared millions of times, I understand. And so, history began to be rewritten not with shouting, but with a nod delivered at the right moment. She listened to them young women working in the service industry. Women who had once been overlooked, made to feel they didn't belong, who once believed they had no right to speak up. We want to learn how to speak out like you, one of them said. Janelle Rhodes shook her head, her gaze steady. I didn't speak with words. I made the system speak its own truth. And this time, I made sure it couldn't look away. Outside the window, Lake Lema was still as glass. But beneath the surface, quiet waves were moving just like the changes that had begun from Seat 1A on the flight Sloan Merritt would never forget. When Altura Air officially announced its first-class culture reform program, a sweeping mandatory overhaul with no exceptions, Janelle Rhodes had already left Havenport 3 days earlier. No farewell press conference, no closing remarks, no applause from CEOs. She didn't need that. She never needed a spotlight to prove her presence. What she left behind wasn't on the front page of a newspaper or tucked in hollow praise. She left behind a new standard. True power doesn't need to be loud. It only needs the right action at the right time. An act so seemingly small, pressing a call button, asking about a denied meal, sending a message to an assistant, had made an entire system bow to recalibration. The behavior once labeled sensitive or overreactive turned out to be the starting point of a silent revolution in the luxury service industry. And from that day on, when a passenger of color, whether a businesswoman, an artist, an activist, or a single mother flying first class for the first time boarded a plane, they would no longer be seen as out of place in a world that once excluded them, because no one knows who might be sitting in seat 1A. It could be a CEO, an investor, a tech founder, or simply someone strong enough not to bow to discrimination, even when it's wrapped in white linen and a professional smile. At Morgan Tech headquarters on a late weekend afternoon, Janelle sat handwriting a letter, a rare gesture in the digital age. She used blue ink, crisp white paper, and penmanship as clean and thoughtful as the strategic mind that built her name. The letter wasn't addressed to CEO Garrett Langford, nor to the board, nor the media. It was addressed to a 16-year-old girl in Florida who had written to her after reading the Forbes article, sharing how a career counselor once told her tech isn't for people like you. You'd be better off in hospitality. In the letter, Janelle wrote, "People will believe you don't deserve the roles they've never seen someone like you in before. Don't be angry about that. Remember, you don't need to raise your voice to prove yourself. You just need to show up at the right moment and never back down." And at the end, she added, P.S. Don't forget, you have every right to sit in seat 1A. And if anyone tells you otherwise, ask them, who was this system really designed for? Months later, at an international summit on equity in service industries, a video clip was played to open the event. The image Janelle Rhodes sitting in first class, a cold sandwich tray in front of her. No dialogue, just soft music. The clip, filmed from a passenger's camera angle, was the same one shared over 20 million times with the hashtag #JoisSeat1A. Everyone in the room, from hotel directors to airline executives, fell completely silent. And they understood. It had never been about the food. It was about an attitude built from bias. It was about the absence of resistance in the past. And it was about the timely presence of one woman who had once been ignored. That fall, Janelle boarded a new flight from Atlanta to Cape Town as an honorary speaker at the Global Leadership Forum. She didn't request special treatment. She didn't mention her name to ground staff. But as she stepped into first class, she noticed something she'd never seen before, a small plaque placed in front of seat 1A, engraved with a simple inscription, "Reserved Seat of Change," and beneath it, "We remember you." Janelle smiled faintly, said nothing. She sat down, fastened her seatbelt. The plane began to roll forward. The sky was still blue, but now it felt wider, because finally there was space for those who had long been told they didn't belong. A denied meal, a cold stare, one seemingly small action had exposed an entire system of discrimination beneath the polished surface of luxury. Janelle Rhodes never shouted, never demanded, never retaliated. She simply made an empire examine itself, and from that moment on, it began to change. Forever. Perhaps after following this story, you'll never look at seat 1A the same way again. It's not just the best seat in first class, not just a symbol of status or privilege. It is a reminder that no matter where you come from, what color your skin is, how your voice sounds, or how many times you've been underestimated, you still deserve to be seen, to be heard, and to be respected. A cold meal tray, an indifferent glance, a refusal with no explanation. Seemingly trivial things, when placed in the hands of someone who understands their worth, can ignite the spark of real change. It wasn't about anger. It was about the power of well-timed silence, of steady conviction, and of a spirit that refuses to bow. This story isn't just for those sitting in the front row. It's for all of us. For anyone who's ever walked into a room and been dismissed because they didn't look like the others. For those who have stayed silent because they thought they didn't have the right to speak. And for those still searching for a way to tell the truth without needing to shout. If you've ever felt excluded, labeled not the right fit, or forgotten in the glow of more polished crowds, remember, change doesn't begin with shouting. It begins with being present at the right time. And you might be the one who sparks that change. Let this story reach further. Perhaps someone out there needs a reminder that they, too, belong. They, too, deserve to be served. They, too, deserve to be called by their name. If you found this story meaningful, don't hesitate to like it, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to stay with us on the Journeys to Come journeys, where every story carries a mission, a voice, and a belief that kindness and fairness are not privileges. They are birthrights for everyone. Thank you for staying until the very end. And if one day you find yourself on a flight, in any seat, remember you too might be the reason a system has to look itself in the mirror.